what would this place look like in the 17th century? For many Americans whose ancestors migrated to the United States over the past centuries, there's a real desire to know more about and connect with the place where their ancestors came from. And in this village, Austerfield near Doncaster, was born one of the most important figures in early colonial America. William Bradford was governor and chronicler of Plymouth Colony, and this is his story. William was born in around 1589. Austerfield was, and still is, a rather small village, and his family were wealthy farmers. But his early life was extremely painful. By the age of 12, he had lost his father, mother, sister, and grandfather. In the words of Thomas Hobbes, who was born around the same time, life was solitary, poor, nasty, short, and brutish. Now you may be wondering whether there's any surviving Bradford family gravestones in the graveyard, and the short answer is no. It's very unusual to find gravestones from the early and mid-17th century, and only the families who were wealthy enough could afford carved memorials. He was plagued by a mysterious illness which left him unable to do any farm work, but this may have made him who he was, because he would spend most of his day reading the Bible and other religious texts, cultivating a faith and knowledge far beyond his years. In fact, at 12 years old, he had already become disillusioned with the Church of England. Now obviously I'm talking about William Bradford, so I might as well come to Bradford, right? Now before you ask, I don't know if his family were originally from Bradford. It's very difficult to trace ancestry that far back in time if you weren't an aristocrat. There was a growing movement of people at the time who were worried that the Church of England was drifting too far away from the Bible and at risk of becoming Catholic. They decided to separate and worship in secret, their own way. And Bradford soon began to visit these secret meetings at the nearby village of Scrooby in the neighbouring county of Nottinghamshire. There's a lot of pilgrim stuff in Scrooby. But the authorities came down hard on this. And this is where my other video on the pilgrims comes in, because the narrative that the pilgrims were a religious minority fleeing persecution, well, to quote one of my favourite TV shows, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the situation's a lot more nuanced than that. Because whilst the Puritans were being oppressed, they also liked to oppress others. For example, it was customary, just like nowadays, to play sports and games on a Sunday afternoon. But to the Puritans, who believed the Sabbath should be kept holy, this was abominable, and they tried to ban sports on Sundays. They became so powerful, in fact, that King James actually had to release a declaration saying that you were allowed to play sports on Sundays. And in December 1621, when Bradford was governor, a new ship arrived at the colony, and these passengers weren't all as strict as the passengers of the Mayflower. On Christmas Day, they decided to celebrate, as was customary, by playing games in the colony. But this shocked Bradford, who, as a Puritan, didn't believe in celebrating Christmas Day. It was a day just like any other. And so he actually confiscated their bats and balls. Regardless, the meeting at Scrooby was discovered and some of the members thrown into prison. Realising that his time in England was probably at an end, the 17-year-old Bradford decided to leave for Holland, which was far more welcoming to Puritan beliefs. But at Boston in Lincolnshire, he was captured and thrown into prison. By 1609, at the age of 18, he had been released and successfully made his way to Holland. Settling in the town of Leyden, William married, got work and started a family. But the Puritan community still weren't entirely happy. For one, they were worried that their community would lose their English identity and customs, as their children were already being influenced by Dutch culture. They were also unhappy with their menial jobs, and King James had established an alliance with Holland which could lead to further persecution. But By establishing a settlement in the new colony in Virginia, they could live and worship as they pleased, free from the Church of England, whilst retaining their personal identity and customs. They wanted to, essentially, recreate life as it was in England. Create a new England. But though the prospect of freedom and adventure must have been exciting, it would also have been tremendously scary. Apart from Jamestown, all other attempts to establish an English colony had failed, and even Jamestown was struggling. Founded in 1607, within the first year 70 of the 108 settlers had died. There were stories of brutal attacks by Native Americans. But despite these fears, they went because they believed God wanted them to. As Bradford wrote in his History of Plymouth Colony,
"For these reformers to be thus constrained to leave their native soil, their lands and livings, and all their friends, was a great sacrifice, and was wondered at by many. But these things did not dismay them, though they sometimes troubled them. For their desires were set on the ways of God, to enjoy his ordinances. They rested on his providence, and knew whom they believed."
And so, after sailing on the Speedwell back to England, he boarded the Mayflower with 101 other passengers and, in July 1620, set sail for the New World. He and his wife made the painful decision to leave their 3-year-old son behind in Holland to be cared for by relatives. He, just like William, would be raised an orphan. The journey took just over 2 months. Bradford didn't write much about what happened, but in one quite humorous anecdote he writes,
"There was an insolent and very profane young man, one of the sailors, which made him the more o'erbearing, who was always harassing the poor people in their sickness, and cursing them daily with gravest execrations, and did not hesitate to tell him that he hoped to help throw half of them overboard before they came to their journey's end. If he were gently reproved by anyone, he would curse and swear most bitterly, but it pleased God, before they came off seas over, to smite the young man with the gravest disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first to be thrown overboard. Thus his curses fell upon his own head, which astonished all his mates, for they saw it was the just hand of God upon him."
After land had been sighted in early November of that year, and before they dropped anchor, a document known as the Mayflower Compact was drawn up on the ship. Signed by 41 male passengers, including William, it served to swear allegiance to the English crown and bind the colonists as an independent community who would work together to ensure their survival and prosperity. It ranks, alongside the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, a foundational American document. They landed at Cape Cod on the 21st of November. As Bradford described,
"They fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them o'er the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their fate on the firm and stable earth, their proper element."
But the jubilation of arrival would soon be met with tragedy. On the 7th of December, his wife, Dorothy, drowned after falling overboard the Mayflower. But if sailing 3,000 miles across the sea was hard enough, establishing a functioning colony which would survive the coming years would be even harder. Bradford described the challenges facing the colonists and the strength they drew from their faith.
"They had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses, or much less towns to repair to seek for succour. What could now sustain them but the Spirit of God and His grace? May not, and ought not, the children of these fathers rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen, which came o'er this great ocean, and were ready to perish in this wilderness. But they cried out unto the Lord, and He heard their voice, and looked upon their adversity."
Adversity is the right word. In the first winter, only around 50 of the original 102 settlers survived, and the remaining colonists struggled with a lack of proper housing and diseases like scurvy. And as they toiled over the next few months, one thing became clear. William Bradford was crucial to the colonists' survival. When their first governor died in 1621, there was only one choice as to his successor. When Bradford and the colony encountered the local Native American tribes, in the early days, when compared against his contemporaries, it seems that he pursued an unusually peaceful and cooperative relationship. Establishing diplomacy soon after they landed, local tribes like the Wampanoag traded, taught them agriculture, and signed a treaty. When the leader of the Wampanoag, Massasoit, became gravely ill, colony doctor Edward Winslow nursed him back to health. And in autumn 1621, to celebrate the harvest, as was customary in England, the colony held a large communal feast, to which many of the Wampanoags attended. We know this better as Thanksgiving. Times when the Pilgrims did enter conflict with tribes was usually the result of these alliances. In 1632, the colonists helped defend Massasoit's village against the rival Narragansett tribe. Whilst he was a man of the 17th century who viewed these people as savages, he understood them to be people with whom it was wise to maintain a peaceful relationship. But probably the darkest chapter of his life was his role in the Pequot War of 1636. A dispute over fur trading, the Plymouth colony, alongside the new colonies of Connecticut and Massachusetts, and native tribes the Narragansetts and Mohegans, fought against the Pequots, eventually slaughtering between 400 and 700 civilians, and sending another 500 to Barbados as slaves. This is me editing, and to be honest, I'd only found out about that now. The video was already finished. I'd written everything, recorded everything, I was just putting it together, and then I happened to read about that and was like, ooh, now I've got to rewrite everything I wrote in the final third because this changes everything. I'm still finding it quite difficult to process. The whole thesis of my video was that William Bradford, yes, he was a man of 17th century Europe, but also when compared to his contemporaries, he was quite surprising in a lot of ways. Positive ways. And then I found out about this, and I don't quite know how to end this video. Bradford wrote of the event that those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others run through with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched and very few escaped, it was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the same, and horrible was the stink and scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the praise thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy. He would continue serving as governor on and off for the next 28 years. When he died in 1657 at the age of 69, he was the richest man in Plymouth colony. In the original version of the script, I spoke at length about how crucial Bradford was to the survival of Plymouth colony, and whilst that's certainly true, I don't think the colony would have survived without him. I just don't feel comfortable reading out the laudatory eulogy I'd written previously. I had originally recorded the ending of this video at Austerfield, but I don't think the tone I used there is quite appropriate now. You may be wondering why I didn't just redo the whole video, but I wanted to show you the process of how we do history. How we can become attached to historical figures, view them a certain way, maybe hold unrealistic expectations of them, only to be ultimately disappointed when their human fallibilities are revealed.